if we knew how pure she was, did not at once adore resting there in the wood, catch her eye, and in that eye lost itself to her soul. Without a mate, the unicorn was made the beast of light, the pure beast of light, the pure, pure beast of light. Just she and he, the seeing and the seen, the seeing and the seen. Eye and eyes delight, the eye
So before we start this conversation, dear Marshall, dear Jeanette, I would like to acknowledge that we are located on the traditional territories. The territories include the Wendat, the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations, and the Métis Nation. Marshall, Jeanette, given all of your achievements, I don't know if you still need to be introduced to our audiences. My God, what a career you both had. So you are the artistic co-founders of Opéra Atelier. The company was founded in 1983.
85.
That's
Yes.
85.
Yes.
You have been honored by foreign governments, including France. You've just been awarded the very prestigious Order of Arts and Letters by the Canadian government as well, by your peers, by the city of Toronto, for your outstanding contribution to music and ballet. Opéra Atelier's productions have been nominated many times for Dora Mavor Awards and won in 2005 and 2007. You've been collaborating with longtime partner, Grammy-nominated and Juno Award-winning Tafel Music Baroque Orchestra, the world's leading orchestra on period instruments as well. You've been acclaimed throughout Canada, internationally, and especially in France and in Versailles, where people love your productions and where you toured 5 times already. So, Jeanette, you are a dancer, choreographer. You received your training in London, Copenhagen, Paris. You've always had a great love for dance history and have become a world expert on Baroque dancing. You have choreographed and performed in more than 70 productions for Opéra Atelier. And in addition to having been honored by both Canada and France, you have been named by Time Magazine as one of Canada's most influential artists in the field of classical music. So thank you for being here with us tonight. Marshall, you have been fascinated with music, theater, dance of the 17th and the 18th centuries since the very beginning of your long career. Alongside Jeanette La Jeunesse, you undertook in-depth studies of Baroque opera in Paris. And with Opéra Atelier, you directed a wide range of period productions of Baroque and early classical. You've worked in close collaboration with Tafel Music for a long time. You've acted as guest instructor for the Center of Baroque Studies in Versailles under conductor Mark Minkowski of the Musiciens du Louvre, and have collaborated with the finest artists in the world, really, of early music. And your productions have toured throughout North America, Europe, and Asia. This is pretty impressive. Thank you again for being here with us. Thank you for this beautiful piece that we've just watched. Thank you for sharing this with us on the occasion of the Night of Ideas. So I am curious to ask you the story behind the scenes of Something Rich and Strange. The pandemic context has for sure been decisive in Opéra Atelier's shift to this beautiful staged production thought for the digital format. But also other initiatives like Together Apart that you have put together at the end of last year. Could you tell us how Opéra Atelier has adapted to this very complicated context for the performing arts and that had actually pretty devastating effects on the performing arts in general? I'm curious to hear your your
Well,
feel about
Tiffany,
that.
you know, we had originally intended to produce Handel's Resurrection and a fully staged production. We were well into rehearsals when Jeanette and I received a phone call from the executive of our board of directors saying, you must stop all rehearsals at once, send everyone home. The rehearsal hall is shut down. There was no notice whatsoever. It was devastating. Halfway through some very exciting rehearsals, suddenly there was a state of emergency declared and we had to close everything. We literally left the studio, the doors were locked, the set was there, costumes were there, props were there, everything. And I think to a great extent, it was that tremendous sense of loss. None of us had ever been through anything remotely like that before. None of the singers, none of the dancers, none of us had had the rug pulled out from under us and told instantly, you must stop creating, you must stop rehearsing. And of course, we love rehearsing more than anything in the world. I think I love it even more than the performance itself. And so there was a real sense that we felt incomplete. We thought we have to find some way to be able to allow our artists to finish this journey, even if it isn't with Handel's Resurrection. We have to find someone a sense of completion. And we also felt that we had a real responsibility to our audience. I mean, our audience does so much for us. They give so much to us. They support us in so many ways. And they also were reeling by the sudden closure of theaters. And so it was a natural thing to suddenly start looking to how we could explore on film a way to reach out to our audience, a way to keep our singers, our dancers, all of our artists, our designers, healthy emotionally, healthy spiritually, healthy as artists in every way. And gradually, the idea of a show where we would choose arias and dances that reflected the very best of each artist who was involved. We put it together like a pastiche, a pasticcio, and loosely link it together with a theme. And we thought the theme could be dreaming. The theme could be dreams, visions, hallucinations. There's so much in the Baroque repertoire dealing with all of those things. In addition to choosing repertoire that already existed, we had already started working with Canadian composer Edmund Huizenga, who had created work that we had already produced at the Royal Chapel in Versailles, in Chicago, in Toronto. So we asked him to continue working on that, along with poetry by Rilke, and we commissioned a special translation of that poetry, which you heard in the production that you just watched. And this was something that grew gradually. It grew very, very organically. The name Something Rich and Strange came from that wonderful song sung by Ariel in Shakespeare's The Tempest, talking about something that looks as though it's terrible, a skeleton of a drowned man, gradually changing into something that is beautiful, something made of coral, eyes that turn to pearls. And we thought, here we are in the midst of something that could be terrible, that could be frightening. We want to turn it into something beautiful and precious. And that's what drove all of us throughout this entire process.
This is amazing. Can you tell us a little bit more about the singer? So soprano Miasha Brugger-Grossman is one of Canada's most distinguished artists. What are your upcoming projects with her? Can you tell us about your collaboration with her?
This collaboration was so exciting. We have no intention of letting it drop here. What we have done and what you just saw in The Eye and the Eye's Delight, we are going to be expanding that. We have already commissioned additional translations from Grace Andriaki, the American playwright who translated the Rilke for us thus far. We're going to be creating additional dances as well. Misha will be an integral part of this. She and Edwin just hit it off incredibly. They really inspired each other. They met together in California, they met in New Brunswick, and then they finally came together in Toronto. So for them, this was a thrilling process of getting to know each other as well. But then the really intriguing thing for me was, how would we tell that story and in a non-linear way? And the natural way to do that was to have dancers be an integral part, not just be there as divertissement, but help tell the story as part of the performance. And that's something Jeanette can speak to.
Yes, we did include, we include dancing in all of our work. Of course, the French Baroque is huge with dancing. That's one of the reasons we love it so very much. Although this piece is modern, it's not Baroque, and we use more modern dance techniques, we still integrated the dance where the dancers are real characters within the piece.
I think this is something that makes our work rather unique, in that people frequently come from our performances thinking that the dancers were singing and thinking that the singers were dancing. We have to have people who are willing to stretch themselves and take risks on stage. Our dancers are taking cues not just from music, they're taking word cues. They don't come in at the last moment. They need to know the text as well as the singers do. But the singers as well have to be willing to integrate their movement with the dancers, so they can't be people who are worried about their voice or only thinking about making a beautiful sound. You can hear someone like Misha, she has gone so far beyond that. Everyone knows she can make beautiful sounds. What she wants now is to communicate dramatically. And that's what I think was so exciting about this, seeing that fusion of singer and dancer, and then the orchestral composition.
Yes, and I guess like the cinematographic experience adds another layer to this.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Tiffany. This is so important because it's a young man, a young Canadian, Marcel Canzona, who we discovered just a couple of years ago. And we discovered him looking at his music videos for rap music and hip hop music. But we were so taken with his editing. We thought his editing techniques were spectacular. And we got in touch with him, started working with him 2 years ago, doing short films. And he's an extraordinary talent. We're going to continue working with him extensively and building towards some complete productions with him. Not to mention the fact that we were surrounded by our creative team. This is a wonderful thing about having created a company. Our set designer, Gerard Gauci, our music director, David Follis, his assistant, Christopher Bagan. I mean, all of these people we have worked together, we've worked with for years. And so we can communicate almost with a sort of artistic or intellectual shorthand. So the fact that we weren't able to be in the same room with each other all of the time was less of a problem than what you would imagine. In some respects, I feel as though the pandemic forced us to communicate more succinctly and more carefully to make certain that we were understood.
So I'm curious to hear, like for this specific production, what kind of protocols you had to put in place. It's mentioned at the beginning of the video that all of the sanitary protocols were respected. This is a very beautiful audiovisual piece, in addition to be a beautiful performing art piece. Can you tell us, how do you have people dance on stage, Jeanette? How do you have musicians perform in this context? And it sounds so complicated.
Well, this is where having the collaboration with film really helped us. We all of the dancers were always distanced 6 feet. That was just a given for the choreography. So once that was in place, we just carried on as though it was a regular piece of choreography. All of the orchestral music was pre-recorded. All of the singing was pre-recorded. So nobody had to be close to anybody else when they were singing, which was considered the most dangerous part because of the breath of the singers. And then they performed to their own track on stage. It also gave them a huge amount of physical freedom to not be actually singing. They were singing very, very lightly, or almost whispering, but it was their own voices they were singing to. So opera is collaborative to begin with. Then to have the collaboration of film added, it ended up being extremely helpful in this situation. But we did have we had stage management behind vinyl shields, and we had somebody watching every minute to make sure we weren't too close to each other. And the people that were close to each other were either a married couple or had bubbled, as they call it nowadays.
Yes. So we really did work very, very carefully to make certain that we were following absolutely every protocol, that everyone was safe at all times. The other thing that I should mention is that everything that we do at Opera Atelier is performed on a painted floor, a grid. And that grid is made up of squares that are 3.5 feet square. It just so happens that that is what we have done ever since the company began. So suddenly, working with that grid, everyone knew, provided they were 2 squares apart from each other the entire time, they were actually 7 feet apart. And so it actually, it worked incredibly,
Yes.
incredibly well.
More than a meter always in between.
Yeah. And of course, we did have people there. We had infection control people. We had our temperatures checked every day that we came in. I had 2 COVID tests during the course of the rehearsals. There were a number of almost scares that ended up being a false alarm. But I think there comes a certain point, you just have to roll with the punches. You have to tell yourself, this is what it is. There's no sense becoming frustrated by it. This is the world that we are operating in now. How can we do that most effectively, most efficiently, and make certain that everyone has the best possible experience? Because at the end of the day, we didn't want this to be a band-aid. We didn't want to say, we're doing this because we couldn't do something else. That was where it began. But by the end, everyone would agree, we wouldn't have wanted to have done anything else. We ended up doing something that we love, that we'll come back to again, that we're extremely proud of. And I think it's intriguing. This whole pandemic and working within it has become a really wonderful catalyst for all of us. It's changed how we work. It's given us a new means of expression that we'll continue exploring in the future.
I should have said more than 2 meters between us all the time.
Yes.
We have to be very, very careful.
Yeah.
France is actually thinking of switching 1 meter distanciation to 2 meters, like
There you
like
are.
Yes.
in Canada now.
Mhm.
So I'm curious to hear your feel about the digital format. So you said like it brought some new creative insight to your productions. Hopefully, the end of 2020, and we'll see like a progressive return to a rather normal situation. But how do you see the long-term impact of this switch towards more cinematographic experiences and more broadly your use of the digital format?
Tiffany, I don't see us using that digital format on stage necessarily, although we have occasionally in the past in live performance. But I do think it's something that is very exciting for us to continue to explore as an add-on to our season, if you like. Now that we have started this, we're so intrigued, we definitely want to continue. The digital work, the film, allows us certain things that are simply impossible on stage. I mean, I love the restrictions, for want of a better word, on stage. I love having to work within those and solve problems in a real story theater sort of way. But it really is thrilling if you are dealing with something that is unusual, that is supernatural, something that steps outside of the realm of reality, just like the film you just saw. Suddenly, it gives us another palette to work with. And I think it's very important that we don't drop that, but that we keep exploring that. It's important for our artists. It's important for our videographer as he continues developing as well. It's something that I don't think we will ever drop completely. We're just going to follow it and see where it takes us in a very, very natural, organic way.
Yes, we look very much forward to getting back into live
Absolutely.
theater with the live audience. That's always going to be our first love, but I think this will be a parallel track
Yes.
for us, a parallel path. And the pandemic is what drove us into it, and I think it's turned into something very, very positive for us.
It also has extended our reach tremendously. I mean, this video has already been seen all over the world. We've had an enormous number of people watch it. It's going to be featured on a particular platform in Chicago, which is Toronto's sister city, in the Harris Theatre for Music and Dancing. We've entered it in multiple short film contests and festivals. Yes, and so I think it's going to give us exposure that we could never have otherwise, unless we were making a DVD of a production. And of course, a DVD of a production is a lovely thing. We've done many of those things over the years. In fact, very recently with Richard Coeur de Lion with Versailles. But that's something different from creating something for film. And to me, this is the exciting thing. We want to explore the creation of opera and ballet created specifically for the medium of film, as opposed to simply recording a production, which is very satisfying in a different way.
So you're giving me a perfect transition. So you're collaborating with Chicago. You're going to go to France pretty soon. Another complicated story. I wanted to ask you. So you've had this ongoing collaboration, especially with Versailles. You've toured to Versailles 5 times. You've presented and co-produced like different productions. What is it like in 2021 to be working internationally when like international mobility has been made so complicated, when like international audiences cannot go to the theater as much as they used to have? What does it look like for you?
Complicated is right.
Yes.
That's for sure.
But I think the wonderful thing is, anywhere you go in the world, artists want to perform. Theaters want to welcome their audience back. Audience members are dying to see live theater. So we're not having to reinvent the wheel or try to lure people back. I think the hardest thing is going to be helping people to realize we can only have a 30% capacity house or 20% or a 40%. And how do we let as many people as want to see these productions actually see them? Once we get into the rehearsal hall, I think the protocols that we need to follow, even when we arrive in France, Jeanette and I are still waiting to find out whether or not we're going to have to quarantine for 7 days or 14 days, or maybe the quarantine will be over by then. When is it that we're going, Jeanette?
We're going at the end of April. So
Yes.
we're hoping maybe we'll have a vaccine or something by that time.
But even then, with the way that we can communicate right now, if we end up having to quarantine for a week or 2 weeks, we are still able to communicate with all of our artists, with our office in Toronto, with all of our stage management in France, as the sets are being built, as costumes are being built, because this particular production is a new production being built from the ground up. Jeanette and I are seeing costume designs and set designs all the time here in Toronto that Antoine Fontaine and Camille Rivière are sending to us. So we'll simply continue doing the same thing once we're in France. I think the important thing is that we try to uncomplicate this. I think the media has done us a tremendous disservice in frightening people, in making people feel as though their lives are more difficult than they are. We hear ridiculous things in the paper about how are parents going to cope with the fact that their children have to stay home from school. And then we hear, how are they going to cope with the fact that their children have to be sent back to school? Everything supposedly becomes a terrible, terrible trauma. Jeanette doesn't think that way. I don't think that way. That's simply not how we are hardwired. We are naturally positive people. We realize that something serious is happening, but at the same time, you have to make decisions. What is going to rule your life? Is fear going to rule your life? Is depression going to rule your life? Or are you going to step outside of that? I think artists want to step outside of that. They want to challenge themselves, and this simply is another challenge. We have to be careful, we have to be sensible, but I don't know anyone who wants to step back from it. It's a thrilling challenge. It's been a catalyst for creativity for all of us.
Well, you mentioned that 6 Canadians had already been in January for
Yes.
auditions. That's the artist's way.
Yes, and you know, 2 perfect examples. When I phoned Misha Brugger-Gosman, when this whole thing just began. Now, she is living in New Brunswick when she's not touring internationally. She's a single mother with 2 children and in a very remote area. That could be a recipe for disaster. when Misha picked up the phone and we began speaking, the first thing she said to me was, Marshall, this time is a gift. When else am I going to be able to have this much time to work on my voice, to work on new repertoire? Her immediate response was positive. I got in touch with Angela Hewitt, probably one of our most famous pianists in Canada and one of the most famous pianists in the world. She was in London, England, where she has an apartment. Her entire international touring schedule was shelved. It would have been a nightmare. She could have been incredibly depressed. The first thing that she said to me was, there's a project that I've wanted to work on for 20 years, and I've been so busy traveling, it's been impossible. Now I can actually work on it. So there are two people, one in New Brunswick, a singer, a pianist in London, England. They both instantly respond to the COVID crisis by saying, this is a gift. I can do something thrilling with this. That's what I think, that's what I would like to think we as artists can bring to the world, help people see another side to the relentless negativity and fear-mongering that we find in the press and say, no, some of those things may be true, but this is also a thrilling time, an exciting time, and a time where we find out what we're really made of.
Thank you for sharing like this optimism and energy. You know, in these times, I think we need to hear things like that. You said like you were not reinventing the wheel. Like from what I know of your recent work, I think more that like, you know, right now I'm thinking of Freddie Mercury's line, you know, the show must go on, and like it sounds like it's been invented for you and Opéra Atelier's artists. I would really like you to tell us a little bit about this incredible odyssey that has been and is still the Jerusalem Delivered project that I have been following for a few months now. I think it's a very, very interesting story to share as like how collaboration can still happen at this moment. So between Opéra Atelier and Opéra Royal de Versailles. This is a very interesting story, and I would like you to share it with us.
Well, we were absolutely thrilled when Hervé Niquet, the conductor, got in touch with us, I guess more than a year ago now, and wanted to talk about an opera that has not been produced in, I suppose, ever is. Yes, it is an opera that was written by the Regent of France in the 17th century. Hervé feels that it is a tremendous masterpiece, and that the Regent is someone who has been given a lot of bad press, but in reality, an extraordinary man and an extraordinary musician, so much so that the Centre de Musique Baroque de Versailles has decided that they are going to dedicate a particular year. Is it 2023?
I'm not sure which year it is.
I think it's 2023 is going to be the year of the Regent, where they're going to be exploring his musical compositions with companies throughout France, both liturgical music and choral music, but also theater music as well. So they come to us asking if we would be interested in collaborating on a full production of Jerusalem Delivered that would happen in Toronto and happen in Versailles as well. Now, Jeanette and I never take on a project that we don't love. We've never done something just to fill in our schedule. We produce operas and ballets that we love and that we want to produce. And so our first concern was we had to hear a recording of it. Whenever we're working on something new, we listen to as many recordings as possible. If there aren't recordings available, we hire instrumentalists to create recordings for us. And naturally, there was no extant recording of all of Jerusalem Delivered. And so between a wonderful collaboration between the Canadian government and the French government.
I believe your help too,
yes,
Tiffany.
Exactly. You help make it possible for us to be able to hire musicians in France. And it was Benoît Dratwicki and Hervé Niquet who put together a small ensemble of singers and instrumentalists. and actually recorded the entire opera for us in the studios at the Centre de Musique. They've sent those to us so that we'll be able to take time listening to them and planning with them. And we are just in the very early planning stages
But
right
yes,
now.
we do love it. And yes,
Yeah.
we are looking forward to doing it.
Yeah, it will be
yeah.
very, very exciting.
Yeah.
So something that we would never have dreamed, and a piece of repertoire which we didn't even know existed. Full of dancing, full of
Yes.
wonderful opportunities for all of us. A very quintessential piece of the period.
Yes, so as I mentioned in the introduction, you both are like leading expert on the Baroque opera and ballet. You studied it in depth in Paris, in the opera. I would like you to share with us like your relationship to this Baroque repertoire, and especially the French Baroque repertoire that I believe you have explored like quite extensively. And I would like you, yes, to maybe tell us a little bit more about your ongoing collaborations with France and with the Opéra Royal de Versailles and the Centre de Musique Baroque de Versailles as well.
Well, when we discovered French Baroque very early in our careers, we felt that it was one of the high points of art in the Western world. There was an extremely discriminating audience, a monarch that supported it, and that work had to be top-notch to please that audience. The artists were there, Lully, Charpentier, then later Rameau, Campra, and even the Regent of France, as we have found out now, and then later on Grétry and these later 18th century composers that we're enjoying so much now. But it was drama, it was music, it was dance in a way that was more powerful than anything we had ever discovered. And it is something that we've admired all our lives and will never cease to admire. We never forget the time during that terrible terrorist attack in France. We had just arrived to do Lully's Armide, which is such a beautiful story of love. And we were so happy to be able to present that at Versailles when that theater and that palace reopened after that attack. It is a memory for us that speaks of the power of art and of our love for France too.
And Opéra Atelier was actually praised at that moment because I remember that it was a time when like most artists were canceling their shows abroad, and you consciously made the choice to push it forward and to have this production presented in Versailles. And I think it comes at no surprise that you have been honored also by the government of France, not only for your outstanding artistic careers, but also for this deep involvement you have.
Tiffany, it was an extraordinary event when you think Armide is a story about the clash of the Muslim and the Christian world, with a Muslim princess and a Christian prince, and not a happy ending, a heartbreaking ending, but an attempt to try to understand and try to find a meeting place between those two worlds. And to be presenting that during that tragedy in French history was an extraordinary thing. In fact, you know, our set design had enormous graphics of Islamic calligraphy. And when the curtain went up on the opening night, first the Marseillaise had been played, there were speeches from the stage, it was deeply moving. When the curtain went up and everyone saw those gigantic Islamic designs, it was so overwhelming. There was an audible gasp in the audience. And it was so thrilling to see this story unfold that looked so realistically and so in such a dispassionate way at both sides of this story. There were really, no one wins in Armide. No one really wins or loses entirely. People are simply affected by the clash of those two cultures. But as Jeanette said, the French Baroque repertoire, for us, nothing touches it. The only thing that comes close to me, it comes closer to Monteverdi than anything else, just in terms of superb music, but precedence being given, I would say, to text, to storytelling. And this is the thing that makes the French work stand out beyond any of the other compositions of the period. It's the fact that you had librettists who were some of the greatest playwrights in the world, who were creating the libretti, and that they were treated with respect by the composers who were realizing that text. I find the marriage of text and music and dancing is absolutely seamless in the French Baroque repertoire. I think it's untouchable. I think it's one of the greatest achievements in the history of Western art, period, just Western art. It's absolutely unique. It's a privilege to explore it. We have produced Armide 3 times. We've produced Charpentier's Médée 4 times. We can come back to it again and again for our entire lives. We will never have begun to plumb what's there. Every time it's a privilege. Every time you learn something new.
This is definitely this passion that we feel when we hear you both speak that made you the greatest ambassadors of this Baroque repertoire and the French Baroque repertoire in North America. And we thank you very much, of course, for this. I would like to maybe conclude this discussion by reframing it through the context of the Night of Ideas. So as you know, a Night of Ideas is an international event happening now simultaneously in over 100 cities all around the world. And all those conversations revolve around one common theme, which is like how to get closer in this pandemic context, in a context where like distanciation is the rule. What does it mean to you both, Jeanette and Marshall, this idea of bringing people closer in this time in particular? Jeanette?
Well, the pandemic has definitely encouraged us to re-examine what closeness can be. It has actually acted as a catalyst for us for new ideas and innovation, as we have discussed. And it's really pushed us to find new ways to communicate with our audience, communicate new ideas, exchange ideas. And it has been the digital medium that has really helped us tremendously.
Yeah. You know, I think one thing that we have learned, or that has really been underlined for us during this time, you can be in the same room with a person and be miles apart from them. Closeness goes beyond physical proximity. And I think this has really been brought home to us. Closeness doesn't have to do with being in the same room. Closeness has to do with sharing ideas, with acting as catalysts for each other. I think if you're of the same mind, or if you can inspire each other, that spans any distance, that spans any protocols that we have to follow. I don't have to hug someone because I love them. In fact, perhaps the fact that I can't hug them makes our meeting even more intense while we wait for the day that that can happen again.
That's a beautiful conclusion to this conversation. Thank you very much, Jeanette. Thank you very much, Marshall, for having this conversation with us on the occasion of Night of Ideas. We wish you a very beautiful season, a nice trip to France, and we hope that the French audiences will be able to see your beautiful, beautiful work again soon on stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for all of the help that you have given us, Tiffany, and all your assistance. Thank you.